What are chemtrails, and should you be scared of them? In this episode of the Ronan Savage Show, I'm going to get into this. I'm going to explain to you how conspiracy theories aren't exactly so kooky, and they just might be plausible. But I'm not going to do this with my own words or my own conjecture. First off, I'm going to let a NASA scientist talk to you for a minute from the JPL, the Jet Propulsion Laboratory. He's one of the Geo-engineers who thinks they're going to, quote, save the world. I'm going to show you some analogies as to how other things have been called conspiracy theories only to be proven as facts later on down the road as well, and let you be the judge for yourself. The trail of clouds that billow from an airplane streaking across the sky can be mesmerizing for children and adults alike. Jet engine traffic has become so common that it's not unusual to see several lingering streaks in the afternoon. And though many consider the streaks beautiful against a bright blue sky, others are alarmed about them. Concerns range from the idea that these streaks could exacerbate global warming to more elaborate theories that the government has secretly been dumping harmful substances on the land.
Lots of big questions about what's going to happen. Again, positive feedback. Permafrost means more carbon's emitted, which makes it warmer, which means less permafrost. This is not a stable system. And in this case, what we mean by tipping point is you would expect that if we didn't have permafrost, you would expect that as the Arctic warmed up, we had more warmer conditions and more plants soak up CO2. You would expect that the Arctic would be a net sink. It would draw down CO2 as the Arctic warmed. But if you're releasing more carbon and you've got this feedback loop going, you're now going to come a net source, right? So the question is, where does that happen? Where does that transition happen? Does it happen next decade? Does it happen 2050? Does it happen 2100? Best estimates right now are closer. And again, the concern how big that effect is depends on answering these questions. There's active research that's happening right now. We just finished the first season of these flights. Okay, so enough doom. What could be done? This is an elegant figure, I think, that Dr. Lynn Russell from Scripps put together. I like it because what she's done is she's illustrated, by the way, this is the only equation we're going to talk about tonight, but it's the most important one when it comes to managing the Earth's climate. Well, what she's showing here, note these dates. These are dates that these physical laws were discovered and proven. These dates are the 1800s. This is 19th century physics, right? This has been proven again and again. All of our technology is based on these physical laws. For example, the first law of thermodynamics. The light coming into the Earth in the amount of sunlight has to be balanced by the heat coming out. Right? That's this balance of the equation. On the left-hand side, you have sunlight coming in, that's represented by S, and how much reaches the surface of the Earth is reduced by the shininess or the reflectiveness of the Earth, the albedo alpha. The Earth responds to that sunlight by radiating heat, and that's governed by the Stefan-Boltzmann law, the very fundamental law. Minus how much is trapped by greenhouse gases, F. Okay, so if I use 8th grade algebra to rearrange this equation, what I find is that the Earth's surface temperature is proportional to the sunlight coming in minus the effect of albedo plus the greenhouse gas forcing. This is a constant, and for the timescales we're talking about, the sun is constant. So the only two knobs you can turn are albedo and the greenhouse gas. Okay, so now we're engineers. How do we save the planet? Okay, plan A that the human species is working on right now is to do two things: to mitigate and adapt. Mitigate means stop putting so much greenhouse gases in the air. This is stabilizing or slowing down the rate of emissions in the atmosphere.
Just a brief preface to the plans of the global geoengineers to, quote, save the world. The mitigate and adapt plans. Mitigate is tax all the first world nations back into third world poverty and cap the third world nations from developing any further. Adapt is continue geoengineering and conducting crazy experiments all over the world haphazardly without regard to life or limb of the human population living on planet Earth. With that preface being complete, I'll let the presentation continue.
That the human species is working on right now is to do two things: to mitigate and adapt. Mitigate means means stop putting so much greenhouse gases in the air. This is stabilizing or slowing down the rate of emissions in the atmosphere. So this is what you hear about mostly in the news. It's about renewable energy, conservation, maybe putting a price on carbon, solar energy trying to slow down the rate of emissions. The other one is to adapt. Notice that the arrow goes in the opposite direction. We don't control temperature, we respond to it. So the other thing that we're doing is we're preparing for the future. People are moving away from the coast, we're building seawalls, we're preparing for storm surge, we're trying to build more resilient energy systems, we're trying to deal with resiliency in agricultural systems. A lot of funding is being spent around the world on adapting, preparing for the worst. Okay, so that's plan A. Now what happens if that's not enough? Here's where geoengineering comes in. Plan B has two parts. The first part is to literally pull carbon dioxide out of the atmosphere. It's not controlling the rate that we're emitting, it's taking what's there today and pulling it out. This is trying to address that CO2 is forever problem, right? So think about having a giant vacuum cleaner that's sucking CO2 out of the atmosphere. It's called carbon dioxide removal. The other scheme is to increase the albedo, right? So I can turn up the albedo, make the Earth shinier. And this is called solar radiation management. So remember,
conspiracy theorists have become suspicious that contrails expelled from jets today are thicker and linger longer than they did in the past. So while they accept that contrails are a natural byproduct of jet engines, the suspicion is that the government has since used that excuse to put other substances in them, creating chemtrails. In addition, conspiracy theorists latch on to anecdotal evidence that connect epidemics of flu-like symptoms to instances of contrails. Those who believe that there's something fishy about contrails have come up with several theories to explain what the government could be covering up. One of the more extreme theories says the government is intentionally spraying people with harmful substances in order to experiment with the effects or to, quote, weed out the sick and elderly. However, many dismiss these theories on the grounds that such experiments would be of no real use. They say that the chemtrails would be released so high in the atmosphere that unpredictable winds would move them around significantly, making such experiments worthless and unreliable. Others speculate that the government is dumping barium salt aerosol on the land in order to assist in radar mapping for defense purposes. Still others believe that the government could be experimenting with weather manipulation for defense purposes. This actually isn't as much of a stretch as it may seem. As long ago as the 1950s, the British were able to successfully, quote, seed clouds with salt, dry ice, and silver iodide to make rain. See the sidebar on this page. It would seem that weather manipulation, then, is a very possible and effective military defense tactic. Conspiracy theorists believe it might have connections to HAARP, the High Frequency Active Auroral Research Program, which studies the atmosphere to advance communication and navigation systems. So let's look at the sidebar. Operation Cumulus. Unfortunately, the British cloud seeding experiments were far more effective than planned. On August 15th, 1952, they resulted in a deadly flash flood in Lynmouth, a village in Devon, England. After dozens of people died in the floods, Operation Cumulus was put on hold. The British Ministry of Defense denied involvement in cloud seeding until 2001, when documents exposing it were declassified. So there you go. The government, the mainstream media, and all the press maintained the standard line that there was no such thing as climate manipulation for 49 years until finally the documents were declassified and they had to admit it. Their hand was in the cookie jar. They're like, oh, yeah, you're right. I was getting some cookies out of there. So now that you see how they will deny and deny and deny that they're not actually spraying chemtrails, that they're not intentionally doing this, is asinine. It's just asinine. To not at least be a little suspicious, to outright scoff at anyone who questions, is very close-minded. That's what I'm saying. This is a call for people to do some investigation on their own, potentially watch videos like this, so you can learn about what's really going on. Another popular theory is that chemtrails are well-intentioned attempts by the government to combat global warming or the depletion of the ozone layer by spraying particles to reflect the sun's radiation. However, if this is true, it's ironic that non-conspiracy theorists, environmentalists blame contrails for polluting the skies. They say that jet traffic has become so bad that sheer cloud cover from contrails which can be seen from space, has been negatively affecting the environment, possibly contributing to global warming. Indeed. Okay, so this is what the people with common sense out here have been saying for a long time. The government started their cloud seeding and the chemtrailing a long time ago. They might have actually thought, listen, these geoengineers originally might have actually thought that they were going to save the planet, as you heard the man say. So they started this. They saw that maybe the sun's cycle was increasing, so let's start chemtrailing to increase albedo and keep the planet a little bit cooler. Well, that has an opposite effect. At first, it reflects sunlight back out into space, but what does get through the chemtrail layer, the cloud layer, doesn't reflect back out into outer space because it hits the chemtrail layer and it bounces back down onto the Earth. So a greater portion of the incoming radiation is maintained, is insulated on the surface of the Earth, raising our overall average temperature and decreasing the difference between day and night temperature. And this is all verifiable. Over the last 20 or 30 years, we've seen the average day and night temperatures come much, much closer together, and the overall average temperature raised by about 3 degrees, I think. So, I think they tried it, and is what they did is they caused our climate to start heating up. And now it's almost like they can't stop because it's a drug addict type deal. If they were to stop, the climate would swing back to where it's naturally supposed to be in a great hurry, and it would probably be pretty bad. So they think in their mind they must keep doing it, and I'll let him use his own words to justify why they think that it's necessary. Again, the JPL scientist is using a hypothetical situation of a plan B that they might use in a tipping point scenario where massive amounts of carbon or methane were released into the atmosphere and thus would trigger an increase in global temperatures.
So there have been a number of schemes proposed for geoengineering, and I'm not going to go through all of them. I'm going to pick a few examples, but they're generally bent into two groups. One is solar radiation management, which is basically cutting back on the amount of incoming solar radiation, whether I'm using sunshades in space or doing things in the atmosphere or changing the Earth's surface. And the other option is pulling CO2 out of the atmosphere, CO2 removal, using a lot of different techniques. I'm going to talk about a few. So, method one for reducing the amount of sunlight hitting the Earth is called stratospheric aerosol injection. What does that mean? Well, scientists pay attention to what happens in the natural environment. And something they've known for a long time is when you have very large volcanoes, we see a drop in temperature around the world. Why does that happen? Well, very big volcanoes like Mount Pinatubo that erupted in the Philippines several times, but in 1991, it lofted so much stuff into the stratosphere in the form of aerosols, sulfur dioxide, that you actually get a haze. This dark layer here is an after photo. Here's a before photo looking in the atmosphere, here's an after. And you can see this drop, you see this big uptick in optical depth. That's where we actually introduce some dimming of the sun. And it lasted for a while, right? This stuff stays up there for a while, a few years. And there's a measurable drop in temperature. And we see this repeatedly when large volcanoes erupt. We see it with Pinatubo, we see it with El Chichon. You can look back through the record and see evidence of changes. So we're taking a lesson from Mother Nature. So the idea is, well, if Mother Nature can do that, why don't we? So there have been a variety of schemes proposed, ranging from zany to pretty low tech. And they all have to do with getting aerosols into the stratosphere and keeping them there for years and years and years. So for example, if we used existing tech...
They all have to do with getting aerosols into the stratosphere and keeping them there for years and years and years. You heard him.
Technology, if we used aircraft, this will be the equivalent of taking a small airline and just saying, you do nothing but spray aerosols in the stratosphere for the next N decades.
Taking a small airline and say, you do nothing but spray aerosols in the atmosphere for the next N decades.
Think about how much that costs. Buy your own airline and do nothing but spray this stuff in the stratosphere. I'll come back to why these things are problematic. I'm just giving an introduction. The other option for cutting down on the sunlight hitting the Earth is to focus on the low clouds. Okay, so you're familiar with this. If you've seen the marine layer come rolling in at night in LA Basin, you've seen low stratus clouds, that's what we're going after here. Another lesson from is to focus on the low clouds, okay? So you're familiar with this. If you've seen the marine layer come rolling in at night in the LA Basin, you've seen low stratus clouds, that's what we're going after here. Another lesson from nature. This is a satellite image with ship tracks. These little tendrils are literally the response of low clouds to ships steaming along. Ships spew out gunk from their smokestacks. These aerosols end up in the clouds. They aggregate and they cause more water droplets sometimes. And when that happens,
they spew out gunk, aerosols. What exactly constitutes junk and aerosols? I'd like an itemized list of the particulates found in said junk and aerosols. I bet it's going to be oxides and heavy metals.
The clouds get brighter. So that's what you're seeing. You're seeing an enhancement in the reflectivity of the albedo of these clouds where there was a ship. So geoengineers go, aha, I'll just build a giant fleet of robotic solar or wind-powered ships that'll just tool around the oceans, and they won't even use sulfur, right? They'll just they'll take salt water and they'll spray salt into the atmosphere, and that will work most of the time. We'll come back to why this has problems.
What are contrails? Contrails are clouds formed when water vapor condenses and freezes around small particles, aerosols, that exist in aircraft exhaust. Some of that water vapor comes from the air around the plane, and some is added by the exhaust of the aircraft. The exhaust of an aircraft contains both gas and solid particles. Both of these are important in the formation of contrails. Some elements of the exhaust gases are not involved in contrail formation, but do not constitute air pollution. Emissions include carbon dioxide, water vapor, nitrogen oxides, carbon monoxides, hydrocarbons such as methane, sulfates, and soot and metal particles. Metal particles. Why would there be metal particles coming out of the jet of an engine? Ask yourself that. Metal particles? Okay, so then it would be a conspiracy theory for me to say that, hey, those trails in the sky have strontium, barium, and aluminum in them, right? Even though NASA says right here that they have metal particles. Okay. So should you be concerned about it? Chemtrails? Contrails are made of the same materials and are formed in the same way, but exist for different lengths of time. Because of the differences in contrail lifespans, contrails can be divided into three groups: short-lived, persistent, non-spreading, and persistent spreading. See the Contrail Formation Guide for more information on how contrails form, or download a presentation to learn how to, quote, read the sky. Here's a picture of a short-lived contrail. Here's a picture of a persistent contrail. This is a persistent spreading contrail. In reality, this is just the stages of development. They just turn the nozzle on, it's them dragging it across the sky, that's it beginning to spread. Ha 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 ha. Sometimes they do actually have real contrails. There is a real phenomenon of water vapor, but I'm telling you what, it says right here, metal particles, soot and metal particles. Is all a jet engine is a flame that's sucking in oxygen and spinning a turbine. I don't really get how that's generating, quote, metal particles, especially enough for ice to cling to and form persistent spreading contrails. I mean, that's got to be a considerable amount of metal particles or oxides or sulfates. Really? Emissions include carbon dioxide, water vapor, nitrogen oxide, carbon monoxide, hydrocarbons, sulfates, that's salt, and soot and metal particles. Now, why in the world? I just, sorry, I don't get it. My bad. Can contrails move, or do they stay in the same location where they were formed? How are contrails different from other clouds? Contrails are human-induced clouds since they are formed by water vapor condensing from freezing on particles from airplane exhaust. Okay, they're not contrails, they're chemtrails, people. Chemtrails. It's not condensation. Okay, condensation is pure water vapor. let's look up the definition of condensation so we can get this right. I just want to be clear. Condensation, from Wikipedia, is the change of the physical state of matter from gas phase into liquid, as is the reverse of vaporization. It can also be defined as the change in the state of water vapor to liquid water when in contact with any surface. When the transition happens from the gaseous phase into the solid phase directly, the change is called deposition. So, they show you an aircraft wing, condensation forming in the low pressure zone above the wing of an aircraft. So this is actually what condensation looks like. That's real condensation. Now, NASA would have you think that these are condensation trails. You see the language? Now, if anybody says, "Oh no, they're not contrails, they're chemtrails," or you know, it's just incredible. Really, so that's condensation. That is water vapor. Really? Okay, no, it's not. It is water that's condensing around soot, metal, hydrocarbon, sulfate particles that have been ejected from an aircraft's engine. At the bare minimum, if not a cocktail that's been created and directly injected to, quote, create increased albedo for solar radiation management and geoengineering. I hope that I've presented this in a way to make it plausible for you to understand that this is not a conspiracy theory, that they have been doing this for quite a long time. Let's go to history of contrail so you can see how long they've been doing this. An early example of contrail formation was observed during the flights of the pilot Zeno Damer in 1919 when he reached altitudes as high as 30,000 feet above Munich, Germany. Okay, that's another thing. They're institutionalizing this in education, so they're teaching contrail science in schools. And the whole point of this website that you're looking at right now is science-edu.larc.nasa.gov, Contrail/edu history. This is all designed to brainwash and educate, not even educate, just to misinform about reality. How did scientists learn how contrails form? Although some early scientists suspected that water vapor emitted from aircraft engines was critical in the production of contrails, others believed the outside air was too dry to allow any significant cloud formation, and it was not known for several years how contrails formed. Research during World War II showed that contrails would form at or below a particular temperature, sometimes referred to as a critical temperature. This temperature changed over time. Schmidt in Germany and Appleman in the United States in 1953 independently developed the currently accepted theory of contrail formation. Their theory showed that the threshold temperature depended on the ambient pressure, temperature, and humidity outside of the aircraft and on the ratio of water vapor and heat released into the atmosphere by the aircraft exhaust. From this theory, Appleman developed a graphical method to determine when an aircraft would or would not form a contrail. Until recently, this graphical technique formed the basis of contrail forecasting algorithm used by the United States Air Force. It says until recently. Note until recently. Now I'm just going to go back to this one last time and let you see the NASA Jet Propulsion Laboratory engineer tell you himself what they're doing. And remember, they can't come right out and tell you this, but why would they have stopped using the Appleman chart in 1992? If it's perfectly applicable based off the laws of physics, why would they stop using it? You know why? It's because their new persistent contrails don't obey the laws of physics. They don't fall under the guidelines of the Appleman chart, so they've made up some newfangled forecast. I say that's what you call a cover-up. But hey, who am I? I'll let you be the judge.
There, for years and years and years. So for example, if we used existing technology, if we used aircraft, this will be the equivalent of taking a small airline and just saying, you do nothing but spray aerosols in the stratosphere for the next N decades. So think about how much that costs. Buy your own airline and do nothing but spray this stuff in the stratosphere.
So think about how much that costs. Do nothing. Buy your own airline and spray the stuff into the stratosphere. Human beings are now carrying out a large-scale geophysical experiment of a kind that could not have happened in the past nor be reproduced in the future. Roger Revelle and Hans Suisse, 1957. The climatic changes that may be produced by the increased CO2 content could be deleterious from the point of view of human beings. The possibilities of deliberately bringing about countervailing climatic changes therefore need to be thoroughly explored. A change in radiation balance in the opposite direction to that which might result from the increase of atmospheric CO2 could be produced by raising the albedo or reflectivity of the Earth. Such a change in albedo could be brought about, for example, by spreading very small reflecting particles over large oceanic areas. The particles should be sufficiently buoyant. President's Science Advisory Committee, 1965. Conspiracy theory or science fact? Chemtrails are a science fact. They have been spraying very small reflecting particles over large atmospheric areas for a very long time. To use their words, they have been carrying out, quote, a large-scale geophysical experiment of a kind that could not have happened in the past nor be reproduced in the future. Well, hopefully it cannot be further reproduced in our future. Hopefully we can inform enough people to have this ended at a government and a mass level, but to be honest with you, I think it's almost too far out of an idea these days, because they've been doing this since the 60s and the 50s. Right out. Just doing it. And denying it. All along the way. The whole way they've been doing it. And to call them out on it, you get called a conspiracy theorist and marginalized, and I think it's just absolutely absurd. These people are very rich and very powerful, and they can go after and attack anyone that rises up to call them out. So this has been a Ronan Savage production, and I've been your host, Ronan Savage. I thank you for tuning in. I hope that I've enlightened you. Please leave a comment in the sections below, share this video, and subscribe to my channel for more productions like this. Thank you.